Mastercast Radio.
Yes, welcome to Mastercast Radio. I am Andrew Rosa, and today I am talking about Resident Evil on Sega platforms. Once again, specifically Sega Genesis. Yes, a few developers out of Russia have put together a little tech demo that you can actually download and put on your EverDrive, playing it on righteous hardware, and it's a tech demo for the original Resident Evil, even though you play as Claire, who didn't appear until the second video game. But it's only a few rooms. The animation hasn't been smoothed out, really, because when Claire moves, she doesn't have a walk cycle. She just kind of levitates. And there's one zombie that isn't programmed to attack you. Instead, it just stands there and takes the abuse. There's really only a few rooms, one little puzzle, and it's presented in an isometric perspective. Also, there's no music or sound effects. Really, it just feels like a proof of concept. And let me just say right here and now, it looks great. You know, if you were to put Resident Evil on Sega Genesis, say the game had come out in 94 rather than 96, for the Genesis, yeah, I think it would have looked like this, absolutely. But, okay, again, I must stress that if the developers should follow through and finish out the game with this isometric perspective, I will buy it. It looks like it has a lot of potential to be a great game, a fun game, a worthy addition to your Resident Evil collection. That being said, you know, I'm not really impressed. Now, that's not a fault against the developers. I mean, we're talking about some coders in Russia. You know, I know nothing about these guys. They may very well be game programmers, but, you know, we're not talking about Capcom here. And when I think back on Resident Evil ports that came out on platforms well, at least you believe to be less than capable, like Resident Evil 2 on Nintendo 64, or if we really want to get deep, the never-released port of Resident Evil for Game Boy Color, it's not as impressive, because even on Game Boy Color, they managed to mimic the fixed camera perspectives of the original game. Yes, it looked very crude, very simple, and it was obvious that it didn't use sprite scaling and rotation for the characters. Instead, you know, they're separate frames of animation to give you the impression that they are moving further away from the camera or even closer to the camera, that sort of thing. It was very basic, but it did a fine job in recreating the overall presentation of the original game. So now we have this isometric perspective, which I've seen a few commenters say, oh, wow, that's really difficult on Sega Genesis, which I debate, because I can think of at least 5 games that used an isometric perspective fairly well. There was The Immortal, Sonic 3D Blast, then we have Spot Goes to Hollywood, Viewpoint, the shooter, and I believe it was called Poltergeist from Electronic Arts. So clearly we have games that were done using an isometric perspective, and rather well, if you ask me. So I'm not blown away by that. I'm like, it's been done. It's been done well. I don't see this being terribly difficult. But like I said, if they finish it out, I will buy it. You make a cartridge, I will certainly snag that shit and put it right next to my other Resident Evil games. I will be happier than a pig in shit, okay? However, I do have some ideas. One idea is this. Good coffee. Why not use the Sega CD? You can go ahead and maintain the isometric perspective, but having the CD, it will be much easier to mass produce, because let's face it, there are plenty of Resident Evil fans as well as retro gamers out there that will, you know, be more than happy to throw $50 at you to get a copy of this fucking game. Or even if you just, but, you know, still, a CD will be much easier to reproduce, or mass produce, I should say. The music will be that much better for it. and you'll even be able to include the cutscenes if you wish to rip them from the first game. Yes, they'll be heavily compressed, but I would be curious to see those cutscenes done on a Sega CD. I think that would be neat. Or if you'd rather go another direction with the Sega CD, having all that extra room on the disc, you could actually go through and recreate the presentation of the original game with the fixed camera perspectives. Yes, it will be 16-bit. You won't have as many colors available to you. The images won't be as detailed, but I think it would look better than the Game Boy Color. Also, you have sprite scaling effects that you could employ for the character sprites. Or if you really want to be daring, you could use flat shaded polygons for the characters. I don't imagine them looking any better than, say, Virtua Fighter on 32X, but that's certainly another way to go. Well, when I used to think about this way back when I thought, you know what, I think I would like to design video games. I was 16. Just before I decided to say, fuck it, you know what, I'm a movie guy. I'm going to make films. Which I didn't decide until I realized just how much math was involved in making video games. So, but yeah, I just thought, those are some avenues you could explore. And if they're listening to this, again, I'm not shitting on your work. I think it shows great promise. And if you should finish it, if you should decide to follow through with the isometric perspective, pardon me, damn, that coffee's coming back with a vengeance. If you should decide to follow through the isometric perspective, go ahead and fix the sprites so that they're characters from the first game rather than Resident Evil 2. Because, again, you play as Claire in this tech demo, yet the levels are clearly inspired by the first game. If you follow through, I will totally buy it. I think you have great potential here to make a great game. But, if you want to take on a greater challenge, I would say, you know what, give the Sega CD a try. If you can make a game for the Sega CD, go for it, man. Because one of the joys of owning a Sega CD is that it doesn't have region lock, if I remember correctly. That, and it plays CDRs. So if you want to just mass produce the game on a CDR or just make the file available for those to burn their own CDs, you can totally do that. And you'll have so much more room to play with thanks to the format, rather than trying to cram everything into a cartridge. Angel Studios had the same difficulties with Resident Evil 2, and yes, they succeeded, but you had quite a few more programmers working on bringing that game to life on Nintendo 64. But those are just some of my ideas and my initial impressions. I think Resident Evil on Genesis would be a great fucking idea. Yeah, if they go this route, great. If not, they want to make it a bit more ambitious, then, fuck, more power to you, man. I would love to see it. But, as a Resident Evil fan, it gave me great joy to see something like Resident Evil on a Sega Genesis. I won't lie. I own Resident Evil for so many platforms now. What's one more? And really on one of my favorite consoles of all time. I mean, no, it's not the Saturn. That's my favorite console of all time. But the Genesis is like almost directly behind it, I grew up with Sega Genesis. I was not a Nintendo kid. But, I would love to see this, I would like to see this complete. But if you should ever hear this, guys, please keep at it. Do not view my comments as discouragement. Not at all. I want this fucking game. Even as it is now, I would take it happily. But still, there are plenty of ideas to explore, I feel. If you have any ideas for the port, please voice them here. I would love to read your comments, get your input. And tell me, how excited are you to see Resident Evil on Sega Genesis? But anyway, thank you very much for hanging in there. My move is almost complete. I already have a retro game room set up, and there will be a video displaying it soon, which will lead into more and more reviews. I've got more 3DO games coming in, so I'm excited. But anyway, thank you for listening in, and we'll talk more later.